Sunday School teacher, I am glad that you have joined us for this time of study and preparation. I'm Tim Smith with Sunday School University, and we are working on the lesson for Sunday, October the 5th. The title of this lesson is Lack of Trust. We're in Numbers chapter 20. The point of the lesson is this: God calls His people to trust Him in every situation. Trust is part of life each and every day. We depend on and trust in certain things. As the nation of Israel continued to travel throughout the wilderness toward the promised land, time and time again they were called on to trust God. Unfortunately, they often chose not to trust God, and the consequences were usually very severe. The structure of the book of Numbers centers around three cycles of rebellion of the Israelites against God and His appointed leader. Cycle 1 ended in chapter 14 with the disobedience of the nation as they were coming into the promised land and turned away. Cycle 2 is found in chapters 16 through 19, and it focuses on a rebellion of the Levites and the tribe of Reuben, who rejected the exclusive nature of the priesthood of Aaron. The third cycle of rebellion is in chapters 20 through 25. And that's where we're going to pick up this third cycle of rebellion. So let's look at chapter 20, verses 2 through 5, and there we'll see the problem. There was no water for the community. So they assembled against Moses and Aaron. The people quarreled with Moses and said, "If only we had perished when our brothers perished before the Lord. Why have you brought the Lord's assembly into this wilderness for us and our livestock to die here? Why have you led us out of Egypt to bring us to this evil place? It's not a place of grain, figs, vines, or pomegranates, and there's no water to drink." As the Israelites journeyed toward the plains of Moab, they entered the wilderness of Zin. A shortage of water led to more complaints. It's also important to note what happened in verse 1. Miriam died, Moses' sister. This chapter begins with the death of Moses' sister and ends with the death of his brother Aaron. Moses was always in a very difficult situation, but here he is grieving the loss of his sister. Now here it says here that there's no water. There's no water. Now, this is the second time they've been here. Okay, they've been in this before during this 40-year journey, and the last time there was plenty, but this time nothing there. And so they began to. It says here, they assembled against. That word "against" is full of anger and hostility. This new generation was following in their parents' footsteps. In verse 3, because of the scarcity of water, the people fought with Moses. The people were so distraught that they expressed a preference to have died in the wilderness. When it says there in verse 3 about when our brothers perished before the Lord, that goes back to to chapter 16, when there was the rebellion that was led by Korah, and nearly 15,000 people died. Or it could refer to all the people that have died during the 40 years of going through the wilderness. But basically what they wanted was anything other than a slow death. They would have rather had been swallowed up by the earth in an instant than to suffer this long, agonizing death of basically thirsting to death. In verse 4, man, they blame Moses. And look, in verse 4, they say, why have you brought the Lord's assembly? They say, we're God's chosen. We're God's special people. But you, Moses, are killing us. We know that the Lord would not have led us astray. The Lord would have never led us to a place where there's no water. The Lord would always take care of us because we're special. But we ain't got no water. And so Moses, it's your fault. I mean, they blame Moses. And also in verse 5, they say, this is not what you promised. This is not in the deal. Verses 6 through 8, then Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly to the doorway of the tent of meeting. They fell face down. The glory of the Lord appeared to them. The Lord spoke to Moses, take the staff and assemble the community. You and your brother Aaron are to speak to the rock while they watch, and it will yield its water. You will bring out water for them from the rock and provide drink for the community and their livestock. That's the plan. Verse 6, hearing the people's complaint, Moses and Aaron went to the doorway of the tent, prayed. I would imagine because it got kind of tense, physical. So they needed to get away from this dangerous crowd. The glory of the Lord appeared to them. It's a reminder of God's presence with them and His special relationship. The Lord spoke to Moses and said, here's what you're to do. He and Aaron together were to speak to the rock. Water would come from the rock. But why say, Moses, go get the staff, that is with the Ark of the Covenant, with the Ten Commandments. Why go get that staff if you were simply going to speak to it? Well, in Exodus chapter 17, verse 6, God provided water from a rock when Moses used the staff to strike the rock in obedience to God's command. But that's not God's plan here at Kadesh. It was just simply speak. But why have the staff? The staff is a visible reminder of God's authority. The result, verse 9. So Moses took the staff from the Lord's presence just as the Lord commanded him. Moses and Aaron summoned the assembly in front of the rock, and Moses said to them, listen, you rebels, must we bring water out of this rock for you? Then Moses raised his hand and struck the rock twice with the staff, so that abundant water gushed out, and the community and the livestock drank. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me to demonstrate my holiness in sight of the Israelites, you will not bring this assembly into the land I have given to you. These are the waters of Mirbath, where the Israelites quarreled with the Lord and He demonstrated His holiness to them. Verse 9, it starts off good. Moses did what the Lord said. Verse 10, they did what the Lord said. They summoned the people to the rock. But instead of speaking to the rock as God had instructed him, Moses angrily confronted the people. I mean, you can hear his frustration, his aspiration. He's at his end. I mean, his sister's just died. He's grieving. He's a frustrated leader, and he looks and says, "You listen, you rebels." They were. His patience with the people had finally reached a breaking point. And when he says, "You rebels," his attitude toward them had changed. And by claiming that he and Aaron would produce water from the rock, Moses was stealing the glory away from God. Verse 11, not only did Moses sin with angry words, but he also sinned in disobeying God's direction to speak to the rock. Verse 12, because Moses and Aaron did not trust the Lord to provide the water, He declared His punishment. You see, God desired to bring glory to Himself inside of Israel through a miracle of water flowing through a rock. Moses now would not lead them into the promised land. In verse 13, God demonstrated His holiness, providing water for the people. The people drank, and so did their livestock. I mean, remember, Moses is we can understand it from a human perspective. Grieving the loss of his sister, being at a breaking point as a leader, frustrated with the rebellion and attitude of the people. We can understand it from a human perspective, but God's God. And He expects total, complete obedience. And I think even in this story, God's grace and mercy is there. Because remember when He said, then Moses, verse 11, then he raised his hand and struck the rock, what? Twice. Ding one time. No water. No water. I think that's God's grace and His mercy saying to Moses, hey buddy, listen, this is not what I told you to do. There's still a chance to do it God's way. Twice. And God says, okay. Even in your rebellion, I'll take care of my people, but it's going to cost you. Well, as you teach this lesson, believers can trust God even when current circumstances appear bleak. Trust God. Number 2, we can turn to God with our needs and our concerns. Just as Moses and Aaron went to God, we can go to God. And we need to understand and we need to recognize that ignoring God's instructions leads to consequences. God gave specific guidance. And remember that before God said, take the staff, hit the rock, water will come out. This time He says, just speak to it. Just because you did it a certain way the first time does not mean that's the same way God wants you to do it the second time. We got to listen to God. We got to do it His way and trust Him so that He receives glory. Well, as you teach this lesson, creating interest, what kinds of tasks is it most important to follow instructions all the way to the end? You know, people fall in one of two categories: those who read and follow directions, and those who think they can figure it out as they go along. Where do you find yourself? What kind of person are you? Talk about that. And then the application, the closing. What advice would you offer members of our group about how to pray for those face-down issues of life? Remember, that's what Moses and Aaron did. They fell before the Lord. They were desperate. What would you say to your friends who were in that kind of a moment? What would you advise them to do? And then also reflecting on some area where you know God is giving you specific instructions to follow His plan. How closely are you following those plans? And what changes do you need to make to get back on track? Again, the title of the lesson is Lack of Trust. The point is, God calls His people to trust Him in every situation. Well, I'll be praying for you as you teach this coming Sunday. God bless you.